Hello everyone, I am Lillymu961 and for today's video I want to dive into something special. This idea came to me during one of those nights where I went to sleep at a decent hour only to wake up at 2 in the morning feeling nauseated and stressed out for reasons I can't begin to explain. I don't know why it happened like that, but that's just how things are sometimes with me. So when it became obvious that I wouldn't be going back to sleep, I turned on my lamp, reached for my Bible, and flipped to where I left off the day before. Now, when it comes to reading the Bible, my goal for each day is to read one chapter first thing in the morning, which is something I started doing around August of last year. So, fast forwarding to June 22nd, the night I was feeling sick and stressed, I started on chapter 21 of 1 Samuel with the intention of only reading one chapter, and then proceeded to read until I had finished that book of the Bible entirely because I just could not stop because, oh my gosh, 1 Samuel is just an addicting, riveting read, and I enjoyed it so much. I loved reading 1 Samuel. It was just fun from beginning to end. I loved it so much. So my aim today in reviewing this book of the Bible is to give it a giant advertisement. In other words, I'm going to try and sell it to you, my viewers and subscribers who are used to anime and K-pop related content from me. Now I realize that some people get finicky when it comes to religious topics, so I get if you don't want to stay and watch this, but I hope that you will because we're gonna have a lot of fun. Because I'm primarily going to focus on this as a piece of writing, even though some of the religious stuff is going to come up because I am a Christian and it's going to come up. It's part of my life, part of my heart. We're not going to be able to escape that entirely, and I don't want to because, again, part of my heart. I can't really, deny part of myself, so there you go. But anywho, I don't know where I'm going with this. What was I about to say? The point being is that 1 Samuel is just a very strong piece of writing that is highly entertaining with evocative and memorable moments and stories such as the popular narrative of David and Goliath, among other things. This book is jam-packed with themes concerning friendship, loyalty, mercy, and how hurtful it is when someone turns their back on you or conspires spitefully against you when you've done nothing but offer kindness and compassion. It is a fast-paced book that places special emphasis on irony and tragedy, as well as mercy, courage, and the importance of standing up for what you believe in. A lot of the writing in this book is just plain beautiful and inspirational, and at the same time, there's so many moments when God and Samuel and even David spill the freshest tea, and I am here for it. It is just awesome. This book contains one of the best underdog stories. It showcases why envy is one of the 7 deadly sins through King Saul. David and Jonathan are ultimate friendship goals. And again, when God is working through Samuel, this guy spills the freshest tea, throws the shade, is outright savage, and I love it. Like for real, you can't get fresher tea. It is just, love it. So to sum all that up, the book of 1 Samuel is just highly engaging from start to finish. That's all I can really say without going into spoiler territory. Yes, some stories within this book, like the epic clash between David and Goliath, are stories that you guys probably already know about, but there is so much more to get invested in, so much more to unpack, and I just really want to dig into those things today because, again, I really enjoyed reading it and I want to share why I loved it. I honestly believe that this is a valuable reading experience, whether you are a Christian or not. So if you're usually timid around religious content, that's fine. You don't have to stay if you don't want to. However, I would implore you to stick around for a bit because this video is going to be a whole basket of fun. Do you want to miss out on the fun? It's gonna be fun. Reading the Bible can be fun, guys. It's really fun. I enjoy it a lot. I need to calm down a bit. I'm getting way too excited. But anywho, from this point forward, I'm going to give an overview of this book in the Bible. Some parts of the narrative I'll go into a lot more detail about, which means there'll be some spoilers. If you would like to read 1 Samuel for yourself first before watching the rest of this video, please do so. If you're not worried about any potential spoilers, or you're not usually interested in this content but are sticking around for one reason or another, then let's just dive in. For those of you who may not know, the Bible is a compilation of 66 books written by 44 authors through the inspiration of God over the course of about 1,500 years. This compilation of text includes books of varying styles and narratives such as history, law, poetry, proverbs, accounts of war, love stories, and a whole lot more. 1 Samuel can be classified as part 1 in the two-part story of King David, an important figure within the Bible. But before we can get to King David, we first have to get into the origins of Samuel and King Saul. First Samuel begins with a short story about a woman named Hannah. Distressed because she was unable to conceive and to bear children, she cried out to the Lord in prayer and made a vow to him, saying, "O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head." Not long after Hannah makes this petition, she gets pregnant and gives birth to Samuel. True to her word, Hannah dedicates Samuel to the Lord, and he becomes a minister for the Lord early in his youth, which is talked about a bit more in chapter 2 through a story about a man named Eli and his wicked sons. But for the sake of time, I'm not going to really delve too deeply into the setup for how Samuel becomes a judge over Israel. If you would like added context, see 1 Samuel chapters 2 and 3. Chapter 4 is a brief account about the capture of the Ark of the Covenant by the Philistines, which was very, very bad news for the Israelites because the Ark of the Covenant contained within it the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, which were given to the people by God through Moses. Not only were these tablets important because of the laws written on them, but the tablets and the Ark itself was a symbol to the world that the Israelites were God's chosen people. One of the great things about the writing here is that the second half of chapter 4 really showcases the despair that fell among the people when the ark was captured, while also connecting it back to the narrative of Eli and his household. Again, I'm not going to delve into that for the sake of time, but it is a very interesting introduction to the general cultural climate of Israel at this time. Also, keep an eye on the Philistines because they're going to be extremely present within this book. Chapters 5 through 7 delve into how the Ark of the Covenant found its way back to Israel. To sum it up, the Philistines gave it back to Israel because the wrath of God fell heavily upon them, and they were scared that they would all end up dead if the Ark wasn't returned to its rightful place among the people of Israel. It is while all this is happening that Samuel becomes a judge for Israel, and when the Ark returns, he makes a plea to Israel to turn away from foreign gods and serve the true, living God with all their hearts. And the people of Israel do this for a time. Now, just as an added bit of background, in the book of Judges, which is, I think, 2 books before 1 Samuel, the writing showcases how the people of Israel had this extremely bad habit of turning away from God to worship idols, which would stir up God's anger. The enemies of the Israelites would oppress them, the people would cry out to God, God would deliver the people through individuals he selected out of compassion. Some notable examples were Deborah, Gideon, and Samson. Once the people were delivered from their oppressors, the people of Israel would do right by God for a time, only to backslide and serve other gods again, which made God angry because the people basically betrayed him again. And typically when someone betrays you, you don't want to associate with that person anymore. So the Israelites would again fall into calamity with their enemies. God would have compassion and deliver them, and they would reconcile. The people would serve him for a while, and then they would backslide again, starting the whole process over. It was a vicious, vicious cycle. This verse from Judges pretty much sums up what was going on. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So instead of doing what God said to do, the people did what they thought was right. And more often than not, it didn't line up with the commands God had given them. Fast forward to 1 Samuel chapter 8. The people of Israel demand a king. Their exact words are, "Make us a king to judge us like all the nations." Then the rest of chapter 8 goes down like this. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." So Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, "Heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also. Now therefore heed their voice. However, you shall solemnly forewarn them, and show them the behavior of the king who will reign over them." So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who asked him for a king. And he said, "This will be the behavior of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for his own chariots and to be his horsemen, and some will run before his chariots. He will appoint captains over his thousands, and captains over his 50s, will set some to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and some to make his weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. And he will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive groves, and give them to his servants. He will take 1/10 of your grain and your vintage, and give it to his officers and servants. And he will take your male servants, your female servants, your finest young men, and your donkeys, and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your sheep, and you will be his servants. And you will cry out in that day because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, and the Lord will not hear you in that day." Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, "No, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles." And Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he repeated them in the hearing of the Lord. So the Lord said to Samuel, "Heed their voice, and make them a king." And Samuel said to the men of Israel, "Every man go to his city." So the basic idea of what is happening here is that the people are rejecting God again, like they have done throughout the book of Judges, and even before this when they were in the wilderness before they reached the promised land. Despite being delivered time and time again, whether it was Pharaoh in Egypt or from their enemies, from the territories around them, God has continuously forgiven and forgiven and forgiven, and has been merciful all these different times. So at this point, it's almost like he's tired of it, and he's just like, "Okay, I will give you the king that you want since you don't want me to rule over you." But he is also letting them know that the king that they want is going to oppress them at some point. Even if it doesn't happen right away, at some point, the king that's going to reign over them is going to end up oppressing them. And in that day, God is not going to hear them. He's like, "No, this is what you wanted. You're going to have to face the consequences of this." It's the sort of thing that parents have to do with their kids sometimes when, if they give their child advice and that child does not want to heed their advice or just completely disregard anything that their parents have to say, then eventually the parents will just step back and be like, "Okay, I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm going to let you do what you want to do, but just know you're going to be facing some consequences, and in that day, don't come crying to me to come rescue you." Basically that sort of thing, because that does happen sometimes in life. Anyone who is a parent knows that those sorts of things, come about. And also what is striking about this to me is just, the amount of, because basically it's facing rejection over and over again. And if you've ever faced rejection in life and you know how much that hurts, just think if you're in this position where you've been good to people and you've been nothing but compassionate and kind, and those people who you've been compassionate and kind to just continuously reject you, continuously mistreat you, continuously say that you're not worth having around. That hurts. So I'm sure that this was very hurtful to God to have to step back like this, but he did so because, again, the people were just adamant about it. So chapters 9 through 11 introduces us to Saul, who will become king. Once again, for the sake of time, not going to discuss how he became king in length. Instead, I'm just going to skip ahead to chapter 12. Once Saul is chosen to be king by God, Samuel's role changes within this narrative. From this point forward, Samuel starts to fade into the background while Saul takes over the narrative. However, while Samuel's spotlight is going to diminish little by little, every speck of time given to him from chapter 12 onward is pure gold. The way he talks to the Israelites is just so completely blunt in chapter 12. Let me just read some of it to you because y'all need to hear this, to lift up the mood, since I definitely went on a small rant that made me a little sad. So let's just push forward, okay? Now Samuel said to all Israel, "Indeed, I have heeded your voice and all that you said to me, and have made a king over you." Then Samuel said to the people, "It is the Lord who raised up Moses and Aaron, and who brought your fathers up from the land of Egypt. Now therefore, stand still, that I may reason with you before the Lord concerning all the righteous acts of the Lord which he did to you and your fathers. When Jacob had gone into Egypt, and your fathers cried out to the Lord, then the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, who brought your fathers out of Egypt, and made them dwell in this place. And when they forgot the Lord their God, he sold them into the hand of Sisera, commander of the army of Hazor, into the hand of the Philistines, and into the hand of the king of Moab, and they fought against them. Then they cried out to the Lord, and said, We have sinned, because we have forsaken the Lord, and served the Baals. And, that is a word. Okay. Ashtoreths. That is a word. Sorry about that. But now deliver us from the hand of our enemies, and we will serve you. And the Lord sent Jerubbaal, Bedan, Jephthah, and Samuel, and delivered you out of the hand of your enemies on every side, and you dwelt in safety. And when you saw that Nahash, king of the Ammonites, came against you, you said to me, No, but a king shall reign over us, when the Lord your God was your king. Now therefore, he is the king whom you have chosen, and whom you have desired. And take note, the Lord has set a king over you. If you fear the Lord and serve him, and obey his voice, and do not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then both you and the king who reigns over you will continue following the Lord your God. However, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you, as it was against your fathers. Now therefore, stand and see this great thing, which the Lord will do before your eyes. Is today not the wheat harvest? I will call to the Lord, and he will send thunder and rain, that you may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, which you have done in the sight of the Lord, in asking a king for yourselves. So Samuel called to the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. And all the people said to Samuel, Pray for your servants to the Lord your God, that we may not die, for we have added to all our sins the evil of asking a king for ourselves. Then Samuel said to the people, Do not fear. You have done all this wickedness, yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. And do not turn aside, for then you would go after empty things, which cannot profit or deliver, for they are nothing. For the Lord will not forsake his people, for his great name's sake, because it has pleased the Lord to make you his people. Moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you, but I will teach you the good and the right way. Only fear the Lord, and serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider what great things he has done for you. But if you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king. The snap was an added thing. Sorry. I try to keep things a little bit funny when I can, but this is serious business, so I'm going to try not to do that too much. But basically what is happening here at this point is that Samuel is just making an address to the people. And, God still has favor over his people, despite the fact that they keep rejecting him over and over again and still continue to do wickedly. So he's pretty much on the last straw level at this point. And, if they turn away from him again, it's okay, I'm gonna be cutting you off for a while because, I'm pissed, So it's pivotal that not only the people follow after the Lord, but that the king, Saul, follows after the Lord. It's important that, they stay faithful. Saul. King Saul. This man, he messes up a lot. A whole lot. In the second year of Saul's reign, he messes up by making an unlawful sacrifice out of impatience. For context on what led to this, see 1 Samuel 13, verses 1 through 9. But right now, I want to focus on what happens when Samuel arrives, seconds after Saul presents this unlawful offering. Now it happened, as soon as he had finished presenting the burnt offering, that Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him, that he might greet him. And Samuel said, "What have you done?" Saul said, "When I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered together at Michmash, then I said, the Philistines will now come down on me at Gilgal, and I have not made supplication to the Lord. Therefore I felt compelled, and offered a burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." Now, this little section here, when you see the reference to a man after his own heart, this is the first reference to David, and this is the beginning of the setup to David. Another addition to this setup is chapter 14, where we are introduced to a central person in David's life, Jonathan. And I'm not really going to discuss chapter 14 because it's mostly just about Jonathan defeating some of the Philistines and Saul making a rash oath in which he accidentally ends up cursing his son Jonathan. Yes, Saul. He messes up one more time. We're going to talk about that right now. Chapter 15 is the definitive place where Saul really makes a blunder. You see, the Lord gave a commandment to Saul to destroy the Amalekites because at some point the Amalekites had ambushed the people of Israel when they were coming up out of Egypt. So he told Saul to annihilate them completely, which meant killing everyone and all of their livestock. But Saul, oh Saul, And Saul attacked the Amalekites from Havilah all the way to Shur, which is east of Egypt. He also took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and were unwilling to utterly destroy them. But everything despised and worthless, that they utterly destroyed. Instead of doing what God told him to do, Saul spared the king of the Amalekites and the best of the livestock. Now God is upset about this, and he says to Samuel, "I greatly regret that I have set up Saul as king, for he has turned back from following me, and has not performed my commandments." And it grieved Samuel, and he cried out to the Lord all night. Early the next morning, Samuel goes to meet Saul, and the first thing Saul says to him is, "Blessed are you of the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord." Honestly, if I had been Samuel in this moment, I would have been highly aggravated at the fact that this guy was trying to boast to me about following God after literally finding out from God that Saul had, in actuality, completely disregarded what the Lord said to do, and instead did what he thought was best, rather than doing the task he was given. It's like if your boss at your job tells you to fulfill a certain task, and instead of doing that task, you go off and do something else. And if you do that on a regular basis, do you think you're going to have that job for long? No, I don't think so. So in a way, Saul is about to get fired here, and you know what? I can't wait. It's gonna be beautiful. So Saul said to him, "Blessed are you in the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord." But Samuel said, "What then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear?" And Saul said, "They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed." Then Samuel said to Saul, "Be quiet, and I will tell you what the Lord said to me last night." And he said to him, "Speak on." The following section I'm about to read to you is just a beautiful spectacle of Samuel wailing on Saul, and Saul trying in vain to worm his way out of trouble. Because, as you'll see in a moment, deep down, he knew he messed up from the get-go. Now the Lord sent you on a mission and said, "Go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed." Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you swoop down on the spoil and do evil in the sight of the Lord? And Saul said to Samuel, "But I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and gone on the mission on which the Lord sent me, and brought back Agag, king of Amalek. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites." But the people took of the plunder, sheep and oxen, the best of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal. So Samuel said, "Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king." So yeah, he definitely just got fired. Then Saul said to Samuel, "I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice." Now, I'm going to pause here for a minute because there's just something that I have to say. Saul, you are the king of these people. Yes, you have an obligation to protect your people and treat them well, but you still have the authority over them, and God has authority over you. Why then would you be afraid of your subordinates when the only one with the authority to remove you from your position is the boss that gave you the position in the first place? If a boss gives you a job to do, it is your responsibility to see that it gets done. If you saw that your subordinates were trying to spare the livestock, you should have laid down the law and made sure they did what they were supposed to do. In other words, you should have been fearful of God lighting a fire under your behind instead of worrying about what the people had to say about it. Of course, even if you had done that, you still would have been in the wrong, because verse 8 specifically says that you, yes you Saul, took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive. God gave you a direct command and you did not obey. And then you had the nerve to act like you had done right when deep down you knew you'd messed up severely. Oh, honey child, please. No, I'm sorry, but no. So Saul then continues saying, "Now therefore please pardon my sin and return with me that I may worship the Lord." But Samuel said to Saul, "I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel." And as Samuel turned around to go away, Saul seized the edge of his robe, and it tore. So Samuel said to him, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and has given it to a neighbor of yours, who is better than you." Like, the freshest tea. That was savage, man. Woo! Now, this chapter is one of the last chapters where Samuel is at the forefront of everything that's going on. So in this particular chapter, he gets one last shining moment that I will not dare spoil, because you just need to read it for yourself. All I can tell you is that after reading this small moment of his, I was just like, well, that was an unexpected turn of events, and it was kind of awesome. Dark, but awesome. Chapter 16 introduces us to David and basically serves as setup for the conflict that's going to come into play later. Not just with the David and Goliath story, but also the conflict that will occur between David and King Saul. Before delving into that though, I do want to read one really nice passage. When Samuel sees one of the elder sons of Jesse, this is David's father by the way, Samuel is like, "Oh my gosh, this guy seems like the guy that God would have me anoint." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." I just really like this verse a lot. It's just sweet. I think it's sweet. In verse 12, David, the youngest of 8, makes his appearance. He wasn't present when Samuel arrived because he was taking care of his father's sheep. And once he does arrive, God tells Samuel that he is the one he should anoint, and Samuel does so. This is the last time we see Samuel for a very long while. In the second half of chapter 16, we learn that a distressing spirit has come over Saul, and his servants suggest that he seek out a skillful harp player to play music for him and thus remove the spirit stressing him. And who so happens to be a really great harp player? That's right, David. So once again, this chapter serves as setup for David, a way for him to be in the exact position he needs to be in order to become king in the future. It's at this part of the narrative that David becomes the main focus. Everything prior was setting up the conflicts that are about to take place here. The first one is one of the most dynamic and influential of these conflicts, the story of David and Goliath. Now, since I'm assuming that most of you probably know the story, I'm just going to give a really short overview of it and analyze a couple of key details. The story of David and Goliath begins when the Philistines and the Israelites are at a stalemate. Among the Philistines, a single warrior emerges, a massive beast of a man known as Goliath. Starting in verse 8 of chapter 17, Goliath proposes a challenge for the Israelites. Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man, that we may fight together. When Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now during this time, David had gone home to tend to his father's sheep, as he was prone to do on occasion. 3 of David's brothers were soldiers in Saul's army, and at this particular point, Goliath had basically been taunting and demanding an opponent from the Israelites for 40 days and nights. The 40 days and 40 nights timestamp is something that occurs repeatedly throughout the Bible. In the story of Noah's Ark, it rained for 40 days and nights, flooding the planet. And in the New Testament, when Jesus went out into the wilderness, he fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. While David was home, his father Jesse commanded him to go to the Israelite camp to give his brothers some food and just to check their overall well-being. So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to fight and shouting for the battle. It is while David is here checking on his brothers that Goliath came out and repeated his challenge. This time David hears it and sees the soldiers flee from the giant. David, enraged by this, steps forward and says, For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? Shortly after David says this, these words are reported to King Saul. Then David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, Your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Go, and the Lord be with you. So Saul puts armor on David and gives him a sword to wield, but the armor was too heavy for him to wear, so he ditched it and instead gathered 5 smooth stones, placed them in his shepherd's bag, and carried a sling out to the battlefield. And this is why this is regarded as one of the ultimate underdog stories. David is still very young, just barely a teenager, and he's about to go fight a massive soldier without any type of armor and just a couple stones and a sling as a weapon. As expected, Goliath mocks him. So the Philistine said to David, Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. David's response and the clash that follows is one of the most inspiring plot progressions ever. I'll explain why in a moment, but first let me just read it to you. Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." So it was, when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword, and drew it out of its sheath, and killed him, and cut off his head with it. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Now the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted, and pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road to Shaaraim, even as far as Gath and Ekron. The reason why this is so inspirational is because it takes an insane amount of courage to stand up for what you believe in. Oftentimes, when we try to fight for what's right, we end up encountering obstacles that feel like massive giants. Often we lose friends. Sometimes we lose family relationships. Sometimes people lash out against you verbally and physically, all because you refuse to stay silent. You refuse to allow evil to continue. Most people, myself included, have a really difficult time doing the hard and necessary things because of this type of backlash. It's difficult to go against the flow of society, to do what you know in your heart to be right. It is easy to give up the fight. It is easy to give into fear. But the strongest thing about this particular story is that David had faith. He believed God would deliver him. And whether you yourself believe in God or not, often the hardest thing in life is having a belief in yourself and that things will be okay no matter what you end up losing by standing up for the things that are most important to you. Fear is the reason why topics such as religion and politics are so difficult for people to talk about sometimes. No one likes to be in constant conflict, and no one wants to feel like they'll be rejected or labeled as an awful person simply because their beliefs differ from another person. Often when we talk about these issues, there is a lack of understanding for the other side, and often we're too concerned about being right, and we don't take the time to really listen to one another. At the same time, though, there comes a point where every person needs to find the answers for themselves, whatever those answers may be. David claimed his answer in this moment, and all the consequences this would bring, for better or for worse. After defeating Goliath, David gains glory and fame. However, he also gains an enemy he never expected to have. Chapter 18 picks up where chapter 17 leaves off. It is here where David meets Jonathan, and they become instant friends to the point that they may as well be brothers. Jonathan, despite being the rightful heir of the throne, gave many of his royal items, such as his robe and sword, to David, symbolically indicating that whatever claim he might have to the throne will eventually belong to David because he has been anointed by God. So celebrations are happening in this chapter as well, and Saul hears this line from the people. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Then Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him. And he said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed only thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom?" The following day, the distressing spirit descends over Saul again. David arrives to play the harp as per usual, but this time Saul has a spear in his hand, and he basically tries to kill David right there. David escapes from Saul, and Saul is now afraid of David because he knows that the Lord is with him. Even so, Saul appoints David as a captain over a regiment in his army, which was numbered at about 1,000. And then from here, Saul starts plotting a different way to get rid of David. First, he demands for David to become his son-in-law by marrying one of his daughters. David is uncomfortable with this at first and declines, but then Saul finds out that his daughter Michal loved David, which made him very happy because he felt that giving Michal to him in marriage would lay a snare for him. He once more demands for David to be his son-in-law. David is still not sure about it because he feels unworthy to be the king's son-in-law, but Saul tells him that if he's determined to prove his worth, then he is to hunt down 100 Philistines and bring back their foreskins. When this mission is accomplished, he'll count David worthy of marrying his daughter and becoming a son-in-law. David agrees to this, and Saul is thinking that he has laid a particularly smart trap for David. He is hoping and expecting for David to die. Instead, David killed 200 of the Philistines and brought their foreskins back to Saul. And Saul, bound to his word, had no choice but to give Michal away in marriage to David, which she was quite pleased about because she loved him anyway, so it all worked out in the end, right? Wrong. Because in chapter 19, right at the start, this happens. Now Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants that they should kill David. Pausing there for just 1 second. Wow, just wow. And remember, Saul wants to kill David just because he's jealous. This is starting to sound like the Scar and Mufasa situation, but in reverse. Anyway, let's continue. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted greatly in David. So Jonathan told David, saying, "My father Saul seeks to kill you. Therefore please be on your guard until morning and stay in a secret place and hide. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the fields where you are, and I will speak with my father about you. Then what I observe I will tell you." Thus Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father, and said to him, "Let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his works have been very good toward you. For he took his life in his hands and killed the Philistine, and the Lord brought about a great deliverance for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against innocent blood to kill David without a cause?" So Saul heeded the voice of Jonathan, and Saul swore, "As the Lord lives, he shall not be killed." Now, 2 things. First, did I not tell you guys that Jonathan is the best friend ever? I kid you not. Jonathan is awesome. Love him. Second, despite Saul saying what he said, it's not long until he changes his tune. Now the distressing spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand, and David was playing music with his hand. Then Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he slipped away from Saul's presence, and he drove the spear into the wall. So David fled and escaped that night. Saul also sent messengers to David's house to watch him and to kill him in the morning. And Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, "If you do not save your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." So Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped. And Michal took an image and laid it in the bed, put a cover of goat's hair for his head, and covered it with clothes. So when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, "He is sick." Then Saul sent the messengers back to see David, saying, "Bring him up to me in the bed that I may kill him." And when the messengers had come in, there was the image in the bed with a cover of goat's hair for his head. Now, all I can think about every time I read that little tiny section, all I can think of is, a fluffed pillow? Impossible! So chapter 20 is mostly about how Jonathan continues to help David evade the wrath of his father, even to the point where Saul tries to kill him. Yes, that happens. Jonathan's own dad was ready to kill him for defending David. Let me read it to you real fast. And Jonathan answered Saul his father and said to him, "Why should he be killed? What has he done?" Then Saul cast a spear at him to kill him, by which Jonathan knew that it was determined by his father to kill David. So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger, and ate no food the 2nd day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had treated him shamefully. So Jonathan remains loyal to David. He warns him, cries with him, and then sends him on his way so his dad won't find him. Now, chapters 21 and 22 are where things really get crazy when it comes to the lengths Saul... Did I say lengths? lengths. Okay, there we go. Lengths Saul will go to. Basically, what you need to know is that Saul has gone 100% psycho at this point. And what happens here is that David has fled to Nob, and he meets up with a priest named Ahimelech. While he's there, we learn this. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chief of the herdsmen who belonged to Saul. In other words, this Doeg guy is going to report David's location to Saul immediately. Now, David sees Doeg, so he knows to run immediately, but one cool thing does happen before David flees, so I just want to read that real quick. And David said to Ahimelech, "Is there not here on hand a spear or a sword? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste." So the priest said, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, there it is, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take that, take it, for there is no other except that one here." And David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me." So David ends up with Goliath's sword. The sword that he used to slay him is now officially his. And I thought that was really cool. I just thought it was awesome and a nice detail, so I just wanted to highlight that real fast. But anywho, Saul arrives in chapter 22 at this place with the priest and everything. David is already gone, but Saul arrives and he confronts Ahimelech and the other priests that are there. Now, I don't want to go into detail about how everything went down because I kid you not, it is highly emotional and I would rather you guys read it for yourselves. But let's just say, once again, that Saul has gone 100% psycho at this point. He go crazy. And it was this particular chapter, chapter 22, that compelled me to keep going until the end because of how senseless all of this is. One part that I will quote is as follows. "So Ahimelech answered the king and said, 'And who among all your servants is as faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law, who goes at your bidding and is honorable in your house?'" Again, I want to really emphasize the point that the only reason Saul is this paranoid about David and wants to kill him so badly is because of this one line that was sung among the people. "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Saul is jealous and threatened by David to the point that it would be comical if not for the immense heartache that David is having to go through, knowing he did absolutely nothing to deserve such hatred. He did not provoke Saul to anger. He always acted wisely and righteously with everyone around him. And this struggle that David is going through just reminds me of the cycle of rejection I talked about earlier with the Israelites and God, especially because it is noted that David is a man after God's own heart. Therefore, the pain this unjustified hatred is bringing to David is an exact reflection of how God feels when he is rejected by his people. And dealing with that type of sorrow just makes what David does next all the more powerful and beautiful. For this section, all I can do is just read the bulk of chapter 24. Once I'm through reading, I'll analyze it a bit before moving on. It reads as follows. Now it happened, when Saul had returned from following the Philistines, that it was told to him, saying, "Take note, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi." Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men from all Israel, and went to seek David and his men on the rocks of the wild goats. So he came to the sheepfolds by the road, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to attend to his needs. David and his men were staying in the recesses of the cave. Then the men of David said to him, "This is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand, and that you may do to him as it seems good to you." And David arose and secretly cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Now it happened afterward that David's heart troubled him, because he had cut Saul's robe. And he said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord." So David restrained his servants with these words, and did not allow them to rise against Saul. And Saul got up from the cave and went on his way. David also arose afterward, went out of the cave, and called out to Saul, saying, "My lord the king." And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed down. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, 'Indeed, David seeks your harm'? Look, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord delivered you today into my hand in the cave, and someone urged me to kill you. But my eyes spared you, and I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Moreover, my father, see the corner of your robe in my hand? For in that I cut off the corner of your robe, and did not kill you. Know and see that there is neither evil nor rebellion in my hand, and I have not sinned against you. Yet you hunt my life to take it. Let the Lord judge between you and me, and let the Lord avenge me on you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancients says, wickedness proceeds from the wicked, but my hand shall not be against you." This is powerful because David had the strength to say no. He had the opportunity and the right to take vengeance in this moment, but he made the decision not to. And on top of that, not only did he spare Saul this time, but he spared him again in chapter 26 because Saul, even after being spared the first time, after hearing these heartfelt words that David said to him, he was still determined that he was going to kill David. So God delivered Saul into his hands 2 times to do as he pleased, and both times David made the decision not to take Saul's life. If that is not a shining example of mercy, I don't know what is. And the best part of this is that this narrative in which David shows compassion on Saul when Saul didn't deserve any of it is foreshadowing to the kind of mercy and compassion Jesus is going to show in the New Testament and on a much greater scale. Emotionally, this is super impactful for me because the amount of restraint it takes to not enact revenge when you have the perfect opportunity to do so is massive. And this guy restrained himself twice against a man who was trying to kill him. Despite the persecution he received from Saul, he still valued Saul and loved him enough to set aside his rage and show mercy twice, only to then have to flee into the territory of the Philistines so Saul would not pursue him, and he had to ally himself with the king of the Philistines and become part of his army as a means of survival, which meant that he had to invade the cities of his own people and kill them all, so word of his alliance with the Philistines would not reach Saul or the general public. He did this as a means of survival against not only Saul, but against the Philistines too, and he was forced to live this way for 1 year and 4 months. Now by chapter 29, the Philistine princes reject David's involvement in their army any further, though the king of the Philistines only saw David in a positive light and wanted him to fight with them in this battle. David himself, having to forcefully shift his loyalties as a means of survival, was prepared to fight against Israel one last time. Fortunately, this did not come to pass. And I think God spared David from that because in that battle he would have had to face not only Saul, but Jonathan. So the timing of the Philistines kicking him out of their army was perfect. You'll notice that I skipped around a lot just now in terms of the chapters. This is primarily because chapters 21 through 31 of 1 Samuel are just so thought-provoking and emotionally stirring that I just do not want to spoil some of the extra surprises that had me shook, had me about to cry, had me feeling all the feelings, because as triumphant as many parts of the Bible are, there is also a lot of tragedy and heartache. It is both fun to read and gut-wrenching to read at points. Things can be more lighthearted and whimsical and kind of funny one moment, and then in the next, dark and painful. 1 Samuel in particular is very balanced in that way, in my opinion, so I thoroughly enjoyed it both for its fun moments and for the moments that hurt bad. Now, just as a fun little note, if 1 Samuel were not part of a compilation of books and was a completely separate book from 2 Samuel, in which, if all the books of the Bible were separate novels and you had 1 Samuel but you had to wait for 2 Samuel to be released, The ending of 1 Samuel is a cliffhanger of legend in that it just tells you what happens so matter-of-factly and as quickly as possible, and then just stops, leaving you with all these feelings you don't know what to do with and all of these questions. Seriously, we are fortunate that 2 Samuel begins immediately after 1 Samuel ends and we already have it there, because if we didn't, my feelings would be wrecked and I would be so upset. So upset. 1 Samuel is an experience. Whether you are a Christian or not, it is a book full of complexity and nuance that even the best novels and stories of our time have trouble conveying. While reading this, I got a better understanding of the overarching themes of the Bible as a whole, which was fantastic for me. And I honestly did not expect to enjoy this book as much as I did. I didn't read it with the intention of ever making a video about it either. But as soon as I finished reading it, I knew that I had to share this with you guys because the narrative presented in 1 Samuel has so much to offer, even just as a story, especially if you know the added context from the earlier books of the Bible. It's just phenomenal. If you don't, it is still highly entertaining and powerful in all sorts of ways. I loved it for all of these little reasons that, honestly, I can't really begin to name them because it was just great. That's all I can say. I don't know if I managed to convince any of you that it is great, but I'm happy that I made this video because doing so has helped me to grow and to start talking about God and how He inspires my heart without fear. That is the greatest takeaway from 1 Samuel for me. Will I make a video for 2 Samuel? To be honest, I don't know. I won't make any promises on that, but what I will say is that I do know that in 2 Samuel, things do take a shift, and, David is not like, the shining example as much as he was in 1 Samuel. I do know that ahead of time, but that's okay because everyone makes mistakes and no one is perfect. Furthermore, it is often when we are at our weakest that our greatest strengths show to others. So take that as you will, I guess. And I haven't really read through all of 2 Samuel yet. I just started it, so I haven't read through all of that yet, and it's going to take me time to get through all of it. So again, I don't know if I'll be doing this again, but yeah, if you enjoyed this though, please leave a like on this video. I put a lot of work into it. I put a lot of heart into it. So if you enjoyed it and you appreciated what I tried to do with this, then please leave a like, please leave a comment, and just thank you for watching to this point. If you made it to this point, thank you. I appreciate it. I love you all. God bless you all. Mwah. See you next time.